Greetings, mere mortals. It is I, Andrew Jackson, Emperor of the United States, and I am here to tell you that this video is a mere work of parody that presents a deliberately distorted view of historical fact in the name of comedic effect. It is not intended to espouse any form of political messaging. So before you go call the creator of this video racist, I simply ask that you keep this disclaimer in mind. Now, in the name of the ruinous powers, let the show begin.
The year is 1828, and now the cultists, the worshippers of foul and godless chaos, are beyond the gates and ravage the once proud nation of America. Heading this bedlam is the heresiarch himself, the irredeemable scourge of all that is civilized and good, Andrew Jackson. After winning a landslide victory in the previous election, the Democrats, a massive army of feckless plebs seduced into a cabal of hellish idolatry, began to despoil the once noble halls of Washington. From their ranks, Jackson selected the most corrupted among them to staff the offices of state, dismissing them when they were no longer useful, leaving his abandoned ministers as sacrifices to the ruinous powers which Jackson served. To make room, the demons swept aside the capable and competent statesmen who had dutifully served the Republic since the days of Washington. But these replacements were a mere charade. Jackson's true advisors could be found in the kitchen, which he had transformed into a portal to the nether realm. Every day, the demon counseled with the cruelest spawn of the underworld, who advised him how to best make the world miserable. But don't abandon hope just yet, dear viewer. For within this crisis were a small group of heroes who worked to undo the evil that Jackson had subjected the nation to. One of these men was Henry Clay, one of the greatest politicians in American history. Another was John Marshall, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and one of the last members of the old founding generation still alive. But deep in the thick of the chaos was the greatest man of the age, John C. Calhoun. As part of the deal that had secured Adams the presidency, Calhoun had infiltrated the Democratic Party, becoming the vice president, right-hand man to Jackson himself. From such a position, Calhoun could listen to the ruinous powers and cast spells in the White House that weakened Jackson's grip. If it weren't for Calhoun's vital work in intel, the America we know would not exist today. But it was not to last. Jackson would soon find out. So you know that constitutional truth, that if a state court deems a law to be unconstitutional, that state can nullify the law within its borders. Well, some states, especially Calhoun's home state of South Carolina, were using this power to curtail Jackson's demonic edicts. South Carolina did meet with some success. However, after years of not turning the US into an empire, Jackson had enough, amassing a huge army of demons to conquer South Carolina and genocide every single man, woman, and child he could get his hands on. As Jackson's forces approached the South Carolinian border, they were met by some of its bravest citizens, among them Calhoun, who had dropped his act as a servant of chaos to protect his home state. As Calhoun surveyed the approaching Jacksonian force, he realized what he was up against. It was clear that the small army of Carolinians would have no chance against such overwhelming evil. So Calhoun did the only thing that he could. He went down on his knees and prayed. Before Jackson could conjure a terrible spell to destroy all of South Carolina's defenses as he had at New Orleans, a bright, heavenly light appeared in the sky, and none other than God himself descended from the heavens. God then smote all of Jackson's army, leaving him with nothing. Though the forces of heaven were unable to kill Jackson, they did force him to negotiate. Due to the stunning and unlikely victory of order over chaos, Jackson was no longer able to terrorize the American population. So he turned his eyes to the Indians. Now, I'm not talking about the savage barbarians who lived out west. Oh no. I'm talking about the good ones, the civilized ones. The Cherokees, Chickasaws, Choctaws, Creeks, and Seminoles. These tribes had long ago adopted the ways of the white man. Such civilized practices as writing, republican government, Christianity, large-scale agriculture, and chattel slavery. They'd also submitted themselves to American law by treaty, and thus had a legal right to their lands. Not that Jackson cared. But the Supreme Court had Chief Justice John Marshall. John Marshall had been appointed to the court by John Adams himself, and was one of the few members of the old Federalist Party still around, and had been known in his day for repeatedly cucking Thomas Jefferson. When the law passed Congress, Marshall wisely vetoed it, to which Jackson, showing his contempt for the law, order, and all that is civilized, simply said,
John Marshall has made his ruling. Now let him enforce it.
However, no reign of terror can last forever. Clay and Calhoun's rituals had weakened Jackson's ability. He was forced to step down from power, leaving incompetent deputies to manage the country in his absence. However, Van Buren and Tyler were the apprentices, for as they worked tirelessly to ruin the American economy, Jackson was laboring on a project to outshine them all. Using the energy gained from the throngs of men, women, children, and Native Americans Jackson had killed, he created the one being worthy of succeeding him, born out of pure evil. Polk!
Yes. Arise, my creation. Awaken.
What is thy will, Master?